At the family beach vacation, my mother-in-law announced, "You'll never be one of us." My husband stayed silent. I turned to her and smiled. "Do you know what the property deed says?" Minutes passed. Everyone went pale when they saw the engraving on the private dock that said, "In honor of my wife, the real owner." At a family beach vacation, my mother-in-law told me I'd never be part of the family. My husband said nothing. I smiled, asked her if she knew what the deed said, and minutes later, everyone went pale after seeing the engraving on the private dock that read, "In honor of my wife, the real owner." That moment changed everything. "Do you really think you'll ever truly be one of us?" Margaret asked, swirling her rose like she was hosting some high society soiree and not a family clambake in South Carolina. I looked at her, calm as ever, and said, "Do you know what the property deed says?" She blinked. Julian shifted uncomfortably beside me but didn't say a word. I stood, gestured toward the dock just behind us, and said softly, "Let's go for a walk." They followed. All of them. My in-laws, siblings-in-law, my husband. No one spoke. Then they saw it, bolted onto the center post of the dock, plain as day, "In honor of my wife, the real owner." Margaret's face turned the color of chalk. We'd been married for 10 years. Julian and I met when we were both in grad school at Northwestern. I was studying environmental design and he was finishing up his MBA. He was funny, kind, quietly ambitious, the type of man who didn't speak unless he had something worth saying. I liked that about him. His family didn't like me. From the start, I was the outsider. The quiet girl from upstate New York with no last name to brag about, no legacy, no connection to old money or tradition. I didn't go to finishing school. I didn't play tennis. I didn't own a single piece of monogrammed anything. I was nothing like them, and Margaret made sure I knew it. They were Southern old money, the kind who still had country club rules burned into their DNA. Charleston types. Their idea of a casual weekend was oysters and linen napkins. I came from a world of casseroles and coupons. We got married in a small, snowy ceremony in Vermont, just the two of us and a justice of the peace. Julian wanted to spare me the drama. He said eloping would save us from the inevitable war his mother would wage about the dress, the venue, the guest list. He was right. But the elopement only made things worse. From that point on, Margaret treated me like a permanent visitor. At family dinners, she would talk over me. At holidays, she'd delegate tasks to the family women and pointedly leave me out. At first, I tried to be gracious. I smiled through it. Julian, to his credit, saw it. He apologized. He always said, "She'll come around. Just give her time." 10 years passed. She didn't come around. Every summer, the family vacationed at their Hilton Head beach house. It had been in the family for 3 generations, and the siblings, Julian, Joanna, and Roland, had always assumed they'd inherit it jointly. Margaret ran the show, but Everett, Julian's father, quietly held the majority stake in the property. He was a soft-spoken man who, over time, seemed to fade into the background of his own life. 2 years ago, during a visit, Everett pulled me aside while everyone else was at the beach. "I want out," he said simply. "Too much noise. Too much fuss." He explained that he wanted to move inland, closer to a golf course he loved. The beach house, for all its charm, had become a war zone of passive aggression and grandstanding. He wanted peace. "I'll sell you my share," he said, "if you promise to take care of the place." I told Julian. He was stunned but on board. We bought Everett's share quietly. I handled most of the paperwork. For tax and estate planning reasons, it was cleaner to put it in my name. Everett didn't care. He just wanted out. A few months later, the adjacent dock went up for auction. It had been owned by a neighbor who passed away, and the family didn't want to maintain it. I jumped at the chance. Again, everything went under my name. Julian and I decided to hold off telling anyone until the time felt right. That summer, we arrived at the house a day before everyone else. I arranged to have a small wooden plaque made and installed on the dock, nothing flashy, just a simple message to honor the new beginning we were creating. In honor of my wife, the real owner. Julian laughed when he saw it. You sure you want to poke the hornet's nest? No, I said. I'm just claiming what's mine. He smiled, but there was a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. He loved his family, even if he knew they'd never fully embrace me. He hated conflict. I knew that. And I loved him enough to take the lead where he couldn't. The rest of the family arrived the next day. Joanna, the eldest, was her usual self, clipped tones, professionally cold, always checking emails from the hospital but never too busy to make a dig. Roland was drunk by 2 p.m. and stinking of some overpriced cologne he probably sprayed to mask the alcohol. Margaret waltzed in like the queen returning to her throne. Nobody noticed anything different about the property. Until Thursday. The family clambake had always been Margaret's night. She hired caterers, but insisted on organizing it herself, down to the color of the napkins. We all had our roles. Julian usually helped with the drinks. I was assigned to general oversight, which meant being politely ignored while Margaret barked orders. That night, after the food was served and everyone was halfway through their wine, Margaret stood up to give her annual toast. She was dressed in a crisp white linen dress, pearls around her neck, looking like something out of a Southern living spread. I just want to say how grateful I am, she began. Grateful for family, for tradition, for roots that run deep. Some things, some people, are timeless. I felt it coming. The setup was too perfect. She looked straight at me. And while not everyone here comes from the same cloth, it's important to remember, family is blood. And not everyone gets to be part of that. There it was. Thinly veiled. A slap dressed as sentiment. I waited. Julian said nothing. He stared at his plate, gripping his fork. I stood up slowly, trying not to tremble. Margaret, I said calmly, do you know what the property deed says? That got her attention. Her smile twitched. I turned to the group. You all might want to take a little walk down to the dock. Julian looked confused. Joanna rolled her eyes. Roland muttered something unintelligible. But they followed. No one spoke as we walked through the sand. The plaque caught the last bit of sunlight, gleaming just enough to be unmistakable. In honor of my wife, the real owner. No embellishment. No extra words. Just the truth. Margaret froze. Her wine glass tilted slightly in her hand. Joanna squinted at the plaque, then at me. What is this? Julian finally spoke. Quietly but firmly. It means what it says. She owns this? Margaret said, her voice suddenly sharp. Julian nodded. We bought Everett's share. And the dock. It's hers. All of it. For the first time, I saw something behind Margaret's eyes that wasn't scorn. It was fear. The loss of control. The realization that her grip on the family's legacy wasn't as ironclad as she thought. Joanna turned and walked back to the house without a word. Roland said, well, damn, and went off to find another beer. Margaret just stood there, mouth slightly open, blinking like someone who had just missed the last train. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the waves. Then I turned and walked away. Julian caught up to me halfway back to the house. He didn't say anything right away. Just walked beside me, matching my pace. That was bold, he finally said. 10 years of pretending I don't hear her, I replied. 10 years of being polite. He nodded slowly. I should have said something sooner. You didn't want to upset her, I finished for him. He didn't deny it. The rest of the evening was subdued, like someone had turned the volume down on the entire family. No more jokes, no more offhand comments. The energy had shifted. They all went quiet, not out of respect, but because they were recalculating. We sat on the porch that night. The dock was just barely visible from where we were. I stared at it, sipping my tea. "Do you regret it?" Julian asked. "No," I said without hesitation. "Do you?" He shook his head, eyes fixed on the horizon. "No. But I think I'm realizing just how much I've let them get away with over the years." "They're your family." "I get it. You're my family, too. I'm your wife." He turned to me. "I know." There was nothing dramatic in the way he said it. No grand apology, no emotional flood. Just a quiet understanding, the kind that sometimes takes a decade of small silences to arrive at. The next morning, breakfast was strained. Margaret didn't come downstairs. Joanna was already packing her things by 9 a.m. Roland, bless him, acted like nothing happened. He asked Julian if they could go fishing later. Julian agreed, because he's Julian, he still believes people change. Mid-morning, I sat at the kitchen island scrolling through emails when Joanna walked in. "Your little stunt was impressive," she said, not looking at me directly. "It wasn't a stunt," I said without looking up. "It was a fact. You do realize this changes everything, right?" That was the point. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Mother's going to lose it." "She already has." Joanna let out a short, dry laugh. "You know, I always thought you were just some quiet nobody Julian married to piss Mom off." I didn't respond. "But now? Now I see you're dangerous." Still, I didn't speak. She left a few minutes later, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Julian came into the room, eyes wide. "She leave already?" "Yep." He sat across from me. "I think she's scared of you now. I think she's scared of losing what little power she thought she had." There were no more family dinners that week. The group dispersed during the day, spending as little time together as possible. Margaret didn't confront me again, at least not directly. But I caught her staring out at the dock more than once, her face unreadable. On the second to last night, Everett called. "How's the house?" he asked casually. "Peaceful," I said, and meant it. I heard from Margaret. "Let me guess, she's having a minor heart attack over the dock?" She said, and I quote, "That girl defaced our property like some Yankee graffiti artist." I laughed. "She thinks it's graffiti?" "She's just shocked," Everett said. "I'm not." "Why not?" "Because I knew if anyone was going to shake the dust off that family's legacy, it would be you. That house was stagnant. You gave it purpose again." I sat with that for a minute. "I miss the ocean breeze," he added. "You're welcome anytime." He chuckled. "I might take you up on that." The day before we were set to leave, Margaret finally approached me. She didn't ask to talk. She just sat beside me on the patio, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting to give a deposition. I waited. "You've made your point," she said. I looked at her. "I wasn't trying to." She frowned. "Then what was the plaque for?" "Reminding everyone who's been holding the place together." Margaret exhaled, sharp and slow. "You'll never be like us." "I don't want to be." She turned toward me, narrowed eyes. "You think money gives you status?" "I think owning something gives me say." "You'll ruin the legacy." "No," I said, standing. "I'll redefine it." She didn't reply. Didn't follow me. Just sat there, staring at the dock like it had personally betrayed her. That night, Julian grilled fish for dinner. Just the two of us. We ate by candlelight on the porch, listening to the waves. The rest of the house was still and dark. No bickering, no condescending comments. Just peace. He poured me a glass of wine, raised his glass, and said, "To new traditions." I clinked my glass against his and smiled. Outside, the dock glowed faintly under the moonlight. The plaque caught the light just enough to sparkle. A small thing. But it said everything that needed to be said. I leaned back, exhaled, and felt, for the first time in years, at home. The following morning began with a heavy, warm wind, one of those southern coastal breezes that carried the scent of salt and damp wood. It was the kind of morning that usually signaled a storm was coming, but instead of clouds, it was Margaret who came down the stairs in a crisp navy linen suit, her expression hard to read. She didn't acknowledge me. She didn't look at Julian. She walked straight to the back patio, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation. Through the kitchen window, I watched her stare at the dock again, hands clasped behind her back like a schoolteacher surveying a classroom that had let her down. "She's mourning something," Julian said from behind me, pouring his coffee. I nodded but didn't speak. Whatever she was mourning, it wasn't me. It was the illusion of control. Of permanence. Of being the matriarch whose word was final. We had planned to stay one more day before driving back up to Asheville, where we'd recently bought a small mountain cottage as a second home. The contrast between the two homes was stark. This beach house represented tension, legacy, and performance. Asheville was ours. Quiet, earthy, restorative. Around mid-morning, I walked out to the dock alone. I wanted to breathe. The sea was calm that day, the sky a flat blue-gray. I sat on the edge of the dock with my legs hanging off, watching the water shift beneath me. Margaret eventually appeared. I heard the wooden steps creak under her weight and knew it was her without turning around. She stood behind me in silence. I let her. "You know," she finally said, "my grandfather built this house with his own 2 hands." I nodded. "Julian told me. He used to sit right here, on this dock. Said it gave him peace." I said nothing. "I don't expect you to care about that," she continued, voice low. "But I do. I spent every summer here as a child. I got engaged here. I watched my babies take their first steps in that sand." Still, I didn't interrupt. Letting her speak felt more powerful than saying anything at all. "I always thought I'd pass it down to Joanna," she said. "She's the oldest. The most proper." I turned slightly. "Did you ever ask her if she wanted it?" Margaret paused. "She never said no," she finally replied. "That's not the same as yes." We sat in silence again. A few gulls called in the distance. Somewhere far down the beach, a child laughed. "I never hated you," Margaret said suddenly. I looked up at her, caught off guard. "I just didn't know where to place you," she added. "You weren't what I expected." "I wasn't trying to be." She looked out toward the horizon. "You married my son without asking permission. You didn't take our name. You didn't blend in. You bought my husband's share out from under me," he offered. I cut in, gently. "Yes," she snapped. "He offered. Because he was tired. Because you made it easy." There it was, the resentment, laid bare. Not of me, exactly, but of the fact that I had quietly filled in the cracks of her family's foundation without asking to be let in. "You see it as me taking over," I said. "But what I've really done is preserved it. Quietly. Carefully. While you all fought and judged and retreated." She didn't answer. "I'm not your enemy, Margaret. But I'm not your servant either." She turned, met my eyes fully for the first time in years. There was something brittle in her stare, something that hadn't been there before. Vulnerability, maybe. Or maybe just age. "This isn't how I imagined the family legacy unfolding," she said. "Maybe it's time to imagine something different." She didn't reply. Just turned and walked away, the hem of her pants fluttering slightly in the wind. Later that afternoon, I found Julian on the upstairs balcony, reading. He looked up as I stepped out. "She talked to you?" he asked. I nodded. "Sort of." He raised an eyebrow. "She's grieving the house. The history. The control she thought she'd always have." He closed his book slowly. "And? She'll get over it. Or she won't." Julian looked tired, in that way that only comes after a lifetime of trying to please too many people at once. She loves this place, he said quietly. So do I. He nodded. But you love it differently. I didn't argue. He was right. I love it the way someone loves a neglected garden, seeing what it could be, not what it was. Not holding on to dried vines and faded petals, but digging into the roots and replanting with care. The next morning, the family began trickling out. Roland left first, in a cloud of cigarette smoke and half-finished beer. He hugged Julian but only nodded at me. Joanna didn't say goodbye at all. Her car peeled out of the driveway just after sunrise. Margaret lingered. Julian offered to help her with her bags, but she waved him off. Before she left, she walked up to me in the kitchen. "The plaque stays?" she asked. "Yes." She pressed her lips together and then, to my shock, gave the faintest nod. "It's not how I'd have done things," she said. "But you're not me." "No," I said. "And thank God for that." There was a flicker of a smile, small, but real. Then she turned and left. Julian and I stayed an extra night alone. We opened a bottle of wine, sat on the dock, and watched the stars come out. The ocean was black and endless. The breeze was light again. "This feels different," Julian said. "It is." "Do you think she'll ever fully accept you?" "No. But I think she sees me now. And maybe that's enough." He leaned into me, rested his head on my shoulder. "I wish I'd spoken up sooner," he whispered. "I know. But you didn't have to say anything tonight. The dock did it for you." And there, under the stars, with the engraved wood warm at our backs and the tide rolling in soft and slow, I felt something I hadn't felt since marrying into that family. Steady. Present. Unshakable. Like I finally belonged, not because someone invited me, but because I claimed my place. Quietly, patiently, without apology. And now, no one could pretend I hadn't. The next morning, the world felt different. Not in some grand, cinematic way, but in the subtle, quiet way you only notice when things that were once sharp finally smooth themselves out. Julian and I had breakfast alone on the patio. The house was still, save for the gentle rustle of palm fronds swaying in the breeze. For the first time in all the years I'd been there, the place felt peaceful. No forced pleasantries. No walking on eggshells. No judgmental glances tossed across dinner tables like darts. Just us, and the slow hum of something that felt a lot like freedom. "I think I want to come here in the off-season," I said, watching a pelican skim the shoreline. "Just us?" Julian asked. "Just us. Maybe invite a few friends. People who actually want to be here." He smiled. "We could repaint the bedrooms. Update the kitchen. Make it feel more like ours. It already does." We spent the day cleaning, resetting the house after the family cyclone. Julian packed up old board games no one played anymore. I cleared the cabinets of decades-old china that Margaret insisted we use, though half the cups were chipped. We moved through the space like new owners reclaiming an old building, carefully clearing away cobwebs, both literal and emotional. Later that evening, we drove into town for dinner, nothing fancy, just a local seafood place we both loved. We lingered over dessert, talking about what we wanted to do next. What this place could be. For us. For the future. When we returned, the house was washed in a soft golden hue from the porch lights. The air smelled of salt and something else, possibility. We walked down to the dock one last time before bed. The plaque caught the light again, glowing just faintly under the stars. "In honor of my wife, the real owner." Julian ran his fingers over the engraving. "She'll never admit it," he said, "but this probably broke her a little." "She needed to be broken," I said softly. "Not out of spite. But so she'd finally realize she doesn't get to write the whole story." He nodded. "You rewrote it." "No," I said, looking out at the black water. "I just made sure I wasn't edited out." The next few weeks were quiet. We returned to Asheville. I got back to work, designing sustainable garden installations for urban buildings. Julian's consulting job picked back up. Life returned to its rhythms. But then, like clockwork, a letter arrived. It was from Margaret. Handwritten. Cream-colored stationery. Embossed initials. Of course. I opened it with a measured breath, not sure if it would be a cease and desist in cursive or a formal declaration of maternal war. It wasn't either. Inside was a short note: you were right to claim what was yours. I may not like how you did it, but I understand now why you did. You won't ever be me. That's probably a good thing. And there was no love, no sincerely, not even a date. Just that. Plain and oddly dignified. I laughed. A full, unexpected, belly-deep laugh. Julian read it over my shoulder and shook his head. That's as close to an apology as she'll ever get. I'll take it. But the most satisfying part? A few months later, during a routine visit from the family attorney, we were informed, casually, as if it were just another line on a spreadsheet, that Margaret had quietly transferred her remaining interest in the beach house into a neutral family trust. The trustee? Me. Julian was stunned. She put you in charge? Looks like it. He sat down, slow and blinking. She's not going to fight it? She already fought, I said. And lost. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't vengeful. It was poetic. The woman who once told me I'd never be one of them had effectively handed me the reins to the legacy she tried to gatekeep. The next summer, we hosted the vacation again, but it looked different. No dress codes. No passive-aggressive rituals. No Margaret-organized speeches. Just close friends, our neighbors from Asheville, a few of Julian's college buddies, and their families. People laughing barefoot in the sand, kids cannonballing off the dock. We grilled burgers, not oysters. Played cards on the porch instead of silently enduring awkward dinners. Everyone who came genuinely wanted to be there. Even Roland stopped by, sober, with a girlfriend who smiled like she actually liked him. And Margaret? She didn't come. She sent a case of wine. And a note that read, "Enjoy your summer. Let me know if you need anything for the house." And I framed the note. Hung it in the hallway, just above the antique key to the original front door. When guests asked what it was, I just smiled and said, "Proof that miracles come in subtle forms." Now, every time I walk out to that dock, I don't think about battles. I think about how revenge doesn't have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes, it's just a plaque. A signature. A transfer of power wrapped in fine stationery. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's standing so firmly in your place that they have no choice but to walk around you. And knowing, without needing to say a word, that you were never asking to be part of their world. You were building your own.